In a bustling coffee shop in downtown Seattle, a scruffy man in a worn hoodie was moments away from discovering just how far betrayal could spread through his own business. What started as ordering a simple cup of coffee quickly turned into systematic theft when the cashier charged him double without blinking a swing. He was just another clueless tourist. But Ethan Park wasn't just a vagrant looking for warmth. For 3 years, he had operated as the founder and owner of Grind and Grace Coffee Co., responsible for building a community hub from his dying mother's recipe and life savings. When Mara Quinn and manager Dylan Cass attempted to scam what they thought was a homeless drifter, they didn't realize they were triggering a reaction from someone trained to spot every crack in a business operation. Ethan launched an undercover investigation that unleashed consequences far beyond what his corrupt employees expected, documenting their tourist premiums, tip theft, and systematic abuse of customers they deemed undesirable. What began as a $12 coffee transformed into a public reckoning that went viral across Seattle's coffee community. After that morning, downtown would never forget the name Park. Before we dive into this story, can you tell us where you're watching from right now? If you've ever felt betrayed by people you trusted to represent you, this story might hit close to home. Hit that like and subscribe button, because integrity always wins in the end. The rain drummed against the glass like impatient fingers as Ethan Park pulled his hood lower, water dripping from the frayed edges onto worn sneakers that had seen better days. The coffee shop's neon sign buzzed overhead. Grind and Grace Coffee Co., his name etched in tasteful serif font beneath it. Though today it felt like reading a stranger's business card. Seattle's morning rush flowed around him like a river. Commuters clutching umbrellas and checking phones, their faces illuminated by the warm glow spilling from his establishment. 3 years ago, he'd stood in this exact spot with his mother, watching her trace the outline of their dream with weathered fingers against the rain-streaked window. "Promise me," she'd whispered, her voice already thin from the cancer that would take her 6 months later. "Promise me you'll make it a place where everyone feels welcome." He pushed through the door, the familiar chime now sounding hollow in his ears. The warmth hit him immediately, but something was wrong. The space he'd designed with his mother's life savings felt cold despite the temperature. Customers hunched over laptops, shoulders tense, glancing up nervously when staff moved too close. The easy conversation he'd cultivated, the gentle hum of community that had once made this place feel like a living room, was replaced by hushed exchanges and quick exits. The barista counter, crafted from reclaimed cedar he'd personally selected, now felt like a fortress wall separating staff from customers. The artwork on the walls, local painters he'd commissioned to create something uniquely Seattle, hung, ignored. Their vibrant colors unable to warm the chill that had settled over his dream. "What can I get you?" The voice cut through his observations like a blade. Behind the counter stood Mara Quinn, her ponytail pulled tight, eyes already dismissive as they swept over his damp hoodie and unshaven face. She'd been hired during the expansion, promising, Dylan had said, eager to learn, smart with numbers. "Just a drip coffee," Ethan said quietly, studying her expression for any flicker of recognition. "Medium?" Mara's fingers danced across the tablet with practiced efficiency, her manicured nails clicking against the screen, the same tablet he'd researched for weeks, reading reviews and comparing features to ensure his staff could serve customers quickly and accurately. Now it felt like a weapon being wielded against him. "That'll be $12.50. The words hung in the air like smoke. $12.50 for a cup of coffee that should cost $6. Ethan felt his chest tighten, but his face remained neutral. He watched Mara's eyes, no guilt, no hesitation, no embarrassment at the outrageous charge. This wasn't a mistake, this was routine. $12.50, he repeated, pulling crumpled bills from his pocket with deliberate slowness. "4 drip coffee, premium single origin," Mara said with a shrug that suggested she'd had this conversation before, had perfected this dance of justification, plus the Seattle tax and tourist adjustment. "You visiting from out of town?" The casual assumptions stung more than the theft. In her eyes, he was exactly what he appeared to be. Another mark, another sucker to be fleeced. Someone who didn't belong in the space he'd created with his own hands and his mother's dreams. Before he could answer, a familiar voice chimed in from a corner table. "Hey, you know what they say?" Tommy Chen raised his own cup in mock salute, his weathered face creased with the kind of humor that barely masked frustration. "They keep raising prices every time the boss steps away. Pretty soon we'll need a mortgage for a month." A few customers chuckled nervously, but Ethan caught the edge beneath Tommy's joke. How long had this been happening? How many loyal customers had been subjected to this casual robbery? Tommy had been coming here since the second week they'd opened, always ordering the same thing, always leaving a generous tip. Now he was making jokes about being robbed in his own neighborhood coffee shop. He handed over the money, watching Mara's confident smile as she processed the transaction. No receipt offered without being asked. No explanation of the mysterious charges. Just practiced theft wrapped in customer service and sealed with a smile that never reached her eyes. Mara barked toward the back station where a woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders was methodically cleaning equipment. "Hurry up with those mugs." We've got actual paying customers waiting. Layla Monroe glanced up, her movements quickening with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to sudden demands and arbitrary urgency. Their eyes met for a split second, hers filled with something that looked like an apology mixed with recognition. Before she looked away, in that moment, Ethan saw everything: the fear, the complicity born of necessity, the slow erosion of the values he thought he'd built into this place. Layla had been one of his best hires, a single mother who'd impressed him with her attention to detail and genuine care for customers. He'd personally trained her on the espresso machine, had watched her face light up when she'd mastered the perfect foam art. Now she moved like a ghost through his shop, afraid to make eye contact, afraid to slow down, afraid to be anything but invisible. As he waited for his overpriced coffee, fragments of memories surfaced unbidden. The one-star review that had prompted his return from visiting the second location. Rude staff, outrageous prices, feels like a scam. Used to be my favorite spot. Now I wouldn't recommend it to my worst enemy. He'd dismissed it as a competitor's jealousy, or maybe just someone having a bad day. Another review had been more specific. Used to love this place. The owner clearly cared about the community. Now it feels like they hate their customers and just want to squeeze every penny out of you. Reading those words in his car outside the second location, he'd felt a cold twist in his stomach. But Dylan had assured him everything was running smoothly, had sent him spreadsheets showing increased revenue, had praised Mara's customer engagement strategies. Now he understood what those strategies actually entailed. The coffee arrived lukewarm, served in a paper cup despite his request to stay. Another small degradation of service? Another corner cut in the name of efficiency? He remembered the ceramic mugs he'd specially ordered, each one slightly different. Each one designed to make customers feel like guests in someone's home rather than marks in a transaction. Ethan found a seat in the back corner, the same spot where he'd drawn his first business plans 3 years ago, sketching layouts on napkins. While his mother provided encouragement and his father's ghost whispered warnings about the restaurant business, the irony wasn't lost on him. He was back where it all started, but now he was a stranger in his own creation. He sipped the bitter brew and pulled out his phone, not to scroll through social media or catch up on emails, but to observe every interaction, every transaction, every moment of casual cruelty disguised as efficiency. The way Mara's smile turned predatory when she spotted someone she deemed a tourist. The way other staff members deferred to her despite her lack of official authority. The way customers paid inflated prices with resignation rather than surprise, suggesting this had been going on long enough to become normalized. This wasn't his shop anymore. It was something else entirely, something that wore his name like a mask while feeding on everything he'd tried to build. The realization settled in his stomach like cold stone, but his expression remained unchanged. 20 years in business, first as an employee and then as an owner, had taught him that the quiet watchers learn the most. His phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. Second location numbers looking great. Hope you're enjoying your time off. Everything here is running like clockwork. Clockwork, like a machine designed to extract maximum profit from human interaction. Like a system that had forgotten the soul that was supposed to animate it. He would stay longer than planned. Much longer. The next morning arrived gray and persistent. Seattle's signature drizzle turning the sidewalks into mirrors that reflected nothing but clouds and the neon glow of coffee. Shop signs competing for attention along Pine Street. Ethan pushed through the door at 7:15 a.m., 15 minutes after opening, early enough to see the machinery of deception in motion, late enough to avoid the suspicion that came with being the first customer. The same corner table welcomed him, like an old friend, though everything else felt foreign. He ordered from a different barista this time, a nervous young man with anxious eyes who couldn't have been more than 19. The kid charged him correctly $6, then glanced anxiously toward the back office as if expecting punishment for his honesty, for failing to maximize profit from every interaction. First week, Ethan asked quietly, noting the way the young man's hands trembled slightly as he operated the register. Third day, actually, the barista replied, voice barely above a whisper, still learning the pricing structure. It's complicated. Complicated. That was one way to describe systematic theft. Dylan Cass emerged at 7:30 sharp, his pressed shirt and confident stride a stark contrast to the shuffling uncertainty of his staff. Ethan remembered the interview 18 months ago, Dylan's talk of maintaining the family atmosphere, his promises to protect what made Grind and Grace special while scaling the business for growth. His MBA credentials had been impressive, his references glowing, his vision for sustainable expansion while preserving core values exactly what Ethan had wanted to hear. Now he watched Dylan survey his domain like a landlord collecting rent, his eyes calculating, measuring every interaction for its profit potential. Mara, front and center, Dylan called, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who'd grown comfortable with power. Walk me through yesterday's numbers. Mara approached with a tablet, her earlier hostility replaced by eager professionalism. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew she was valued, protected, essential to the machine. Up 12% from last Tuesday, she announced proudly. The tourist premium is working beautifully. Tourist premium? Dylan's smile was sharp as broken glass, the kind of expression that belonged in a boardroom, not a community coffee shop. I like that. Very diplomatic. They spoke in lowered voices near the espresso machine, but Ethan caught fragments, confused out-of-towners, cash customers, no paper trail. Each phrase was a small knife twist in what remained of his trust. They weren't just stealing, they were proud of their system, had refined it, given a terminology that made it sound like legitimate business strategy. A family of 4 approached the counterparents with young children, clearly visiting from somewhere that still had autumn leaves and reasonable coffee prices. The father wore a University of Oregon sweatshirt. The mother carried a guidebook to Seattle attractions, and the kids pressed their faces against the pastry case with wide-eyed wonder. Mara's demeanor shifted instantly, her smile becoming predatory rather than welcoming. She'd identified her marks. I'd recommend our signature blend, she said, fingers already dancing across the screen before they'd even decided. It's what Seattle's famous for, and our house-made pastries are locally sourced and artisanal. Ethan watched the total climb with sick fascination. 2 coffees, 2 hot chocolates, a croissant, and a muffin. $38. The father's eyebrows raised, but embarrassment kept him silent. Tourist tax in action, shame weaponized to prevent complaints. 38, the mother whispered, but her husband was already pulling out his wallet, unwilling to make a scene in front of their children. Seattle prices, Mara said with a shrug that conveyed both sympathy and inevitability. Everything costs more here. Supply chain, rent, you know how it is. Some people, Dylan said, just loud enough for staff to hear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability, come to places like this thinking they belong, you know? But there's a difference between customers who appreciate quality and, well, everyone else. His eyes swept the room, lingering on a construction worker nursing a single coffee in the corner, an elderly woman reading a paperback novel with a cup that had been empty for 20 minutes, a teenager with a second-hand laptop and a determined expression that suggested dreams bigger than his current circumstances. The undesirable elements? The people who didn't maximize revenue per square foot? Ethan felt his jaw tighten as he recognized the philosophy at work here. This wasn't just about overcharging tourists, it was about systematic exclusion, about transforming a community space into an economic filter that sorted people into profitable and unprofitable categories. Layla moved between tables, refilling water glasses with mechanical precision. She wore the same uniform as everyone else, but something in her posture suggested she carried a different weight. When she reached Dylan's vicinity, he snapped his fingers without looking up from his conversation with Mara. Leela, table 6, is lingering. We need turnover, not a library. They just ordered food 5 minutes ago. Mr. Cass, she replied, her voice carefully neutral. I don't care if they ordered caviar and champagne. This is a business, not a charity. Dylan's voice carried across half the shop. Humiliation as public performance. Maybe you need to work a double again tomorrow to remember that. Help you. Focus on what actually matters here. Leela's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. A double shift meant missing her daughter's school play, Ethan realized, remembering their brief conversation during her hiring process 2 years ago. Emma was 7 now, in 2nd grade, and Leela had mentioned she was in the drama club. Some things were more valuable than profit margins, but Dylan had apparently never learned that lesson. Yes, Mr. Cass, Leela whispered, the words carrying the weight of a woman who'd learned that resistance cost more than compliance. The morning continued its ugly rhythm. Mara overcharged a young couple celebrating their anniversary, $23 for 2 lattes and a shared pastry, then split the difference with Dylan when she thought no one was watching. Dylan berated a barista for giving a homeless man a cup of water, lecturing about enabling and setting precedents. Leela worked with the quiet desperation of someone afraid to make waves, afraid to be noticed, afraid to give anyone a reason to question her continued employment. Around 10 a.m., Ethan watched Dylan casually pocket cash from the tip jar while making a joke to Mara about millennial entitlement and how some people expect everything for free. The few customers who noticed looked away quickly, complicit in their silence because confronting theft felt harder than ignoring it. A new customer entered, an older black man in a rumpled suit, clearly running late for something important. He ordered quickly, politely, just a coffee to go. Mara barely looked at him as she rang up $8.50 for what should have been a $4 drink. $8.50, she said, not bothering with the usual explanations about premium beans or Seattle taxes. The man paused, confusion flickering across his face. For a regular coffee? That's the price. Mara replied with ice-cold indifference. You want it, or not? Dylan watched from across the shop, his expression making it clear that any complaint would be met with escalation, with accusations of creating disturbances, with the kind of confrontation that would turn other customers against the complainer, rather than the establishment. The man paid without another word and left quickly. As Leela passed Ethan's table with a bus tub full of dishes, she stumbled slightly, a spoon clattering to the floor near his feet. It was clearly intentional, a moment of manufactured clumsiness that gave her cover to whisper as she bent to retrieve it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know who you are. I've known since yesterday. 2 words that contained everything: acknowledgement, shame, and a plea for understanding. She knew who he was, had known from the moment he walked in, but fear had kept her silent. The weight of her complicity, her survival instincts warring with her conscience, it all lived in those syllables. Ethan met her eyes and nodded once. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition, understanding. She straightened, clutching the spoon like a lifeline, and continued her rounds. The rot had spread deeper than he'd imagined. This wasn't just gritted, it was a systematic dismantling of everything he'd tried to build. Trust corrupted into transaction, community reduced to commodity, his mother's investment and his father's insurance money perverted into a machine for extracting maximum profit from human interaction. But roots could be cleaned, and systems could be changed, gardens could be restored. First, though, he needed to see how far they'd fallen, how deep their arrogance ran, how confident they'd become in their corruption. Tomorrow, he would test their boundaries. The shop felt different at closing time, like a theater after the last curtain call, still holding the energy of performance, but empty of audience. Ethan waited in the alley beside the dumpster, rain collecting in the hood of his jacket as he watched Dylan lock the front door and stride away toward his BMW, always the first to leave. Naturally, 20 minutes later, when the last employee's footsteps faded into the Seattle evening, Ethan used his key, one they'd forgotten he still possessed, to slip inside through the back entrance. The familiar darkness welcomed him, but even the shadows felt corrupted now. His footsteps echoed on the polished concrete floor as he made his way to the front counter, muscle memory guiding him past tables and chairs toward the register he'd purchased with such hope 3 years ago. He didn't intend to steal, didn't even intend to snoop through the day's receipts, though the temptation gnawed at him. He simply wanted to stand where he'd once belonged, to touch the surfaces he'd chosen, to remember what this place had meant before greed had poisoned it. Register's screen glowed soft blue in the darkness. Ethan pressed a few buttons, not trying to access anything, just reacquainting himself with the interface. The sound of the cash drawer sliding open seemed thunderous in the silence. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice cut through the darkness like a whip crack. Ethan turned slowly to find Mara Quinn silhouetted in the doorway, her keys still in her hand, eyes blazing with righteous indignation. She'd returned for something, probably the purse he could see sitting on the back counter. "I said, what are you doing?" Mara stepped forward, her voice rising. "This is breaking and entering. I'm calling the police." Ethan closed the register drawer with deliberate calm. "Just looking around." "Looking around? You're robbing us." Mara fumbled for her phone, but her hands were shaking with adrenaline. Dylan. Footsteps pounded across the parking lot. Dylan burst through the door like an action hero, chest puffed with authority and barely contained violence. His eyes swept from Mara to Ethan to the register, crafting a narrative that would justify whatever came next. "Let me guess," Dylan said, his voice dripping with practiced condescension. "Homeless guy looking for an easy score. Or maybe you're one of those entitled millennials who thinks the world owes you something." Ethan said nothing, just watched Dylan's performance unfold. The man had clearly rehearsed this moment, probably fantasized about being the hero who caught a thief, who protected his business from the dregs of society. "You know what I see?" Dylan continued, circling like a predator. "I see a loser who can't afford our coffee trying to steal what better people have earned. You probably think this is some kind of social justice, right? Taking from the successful to give to the well, the unsuccessful." Mara nodded eagerly, emboldened by Dylan's presence. "He's been coming in all week, acting suspicious. I knew something was off about him." "Called that one right," Dylan said with a cruel smile. "Some people, they look at a place like this, successful, clean, profitable, and they think they deserve a piece of it. But that's not how the world works, buddy. Success requires effort, standards, things you clearly don't understand." Behind the counter, a shadow moved. Lila Monroe stepped out of the back room where she'd apparently been finishing cleaning duties, her face pale in the emergency lighting. Her eyes met Ethan's across the space, and in that moment, recognition flickered to life. She knew, had always known. "The police are on their way," Mara announced, waving her phone like a weapon. "Hope you're ready to explain this to a judge." Dylan laughed, the sound bouncing off the walls like broken glass. "Judge is going to love this. Vagrant breaks into upscale coffee shop, gets caught red-handed by responsible employees. It's like a cautionary tale about what happens when society stops having standards." Ethan finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Standards. That's right, standards. Something you wouldn't know about, living like you do." Dylan gestured at Ethan's clothes, his unshaven face, his general appearance of someone who'd given up on polite society. "This is a business, not a shelter. We serve customers who can pay, who understand value, who respect what we've built here." "What you've built," Ethan repeated. "Damn right, what we've built. This place was nothing when I got here. Now look at it, profitable, efficient, serving the right clientele. That's what real leadership looks like." Leela made a soft sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Dylan whirled toward her. "What? Nothing, Mr. Kess? She looked at Ethan again, her eyes wide with something approaching terror. "I think maybe," Maybe what? But Ethan was already moving toward the door, his silence more powerful than any argument. He paused at the threshold, looking back at the three of them frozen in their tableau of righteous anger and dawning uncertainty. Leela, he said quietly, I'll be back tomorrow. Decide who you work for. Then he was gone, leaving only the echo of rain on pavement and three people standing in a coffee shop that suddenly felt much too small for the weight of what had just happened. Mara's phone was still pressed to her ear, the police still on their way, but something had shifted in the air. Some fundamental change in the balance of power that none of them quite understood yet. They would understand soon enough. Morning came bright and clear, Seattle's rare gift of sunshine painting the coffee shop's windows gold as Ethan Park walked through the front door. But this time was different. This time he wore a crisp navy polo with the Grind and Grace logo embroidered over his heart, a name tag that read Ethan Owner clipped to his chest, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and where you belong. The shop fell silent like someone had thrown a switch. Tommy Chen looked up from his usual corner table, recognition dawning across his weathered features. Well, I'll be damned. The prodigal son returns? Other customers began to turn, whispers spreading like ripples across water. Phones appeared, some for photos, others for quick Google searches to confirm what their eyes were telling them. The scruffy stranger from yesterday was indeed Ethan Park, the man whose mother's recipe still graced their menu boards, whose story of bootstrap entrepreneurship had been featured in Seattle Met just 2 years ago. Behind the counter, Mara Quinn went white as paper, a ceramic mug slipping from her fingers to shatter against the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. Dylan Cass emerged from the back office, his usual swagger intact until his eyes met Ethan's. The color drained from his face as 24 hours of assumptions and accusations collided with reality. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. A fish pulled from familiar water into burning air. But it was Leela Monroe who moved first. She stepped out from behind the espresso machine, her voice shaking but clear. Mr. Park, I have something to tell you. The words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. The overcharging, the tip skimming, the systematic abuse of customers Dylan deemed undesirable. She spoke of double shifts without overtime, of being forced to chase away elderly customers who nursed single coffees too long, of watching her workplace transform into something ugly and predatory. I should have called you, Layla said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I should have stopped it, but I was scared. I need this job. My daughter Ethan raised a hand gently, stopping her confession. Layla, take a breath. The shop had filled with an audience, now customers, delaying their commutes, passers-by drawn by the drama unfolding behind the windows. Phones recorded. Everything, the modern public square demanding transparency. Dylan finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. Ethan, man, I can explain everything. You've been gone for weeks. We had to make decisions, had to maximize efficiency by charging tourists double. That's not, look, there's a lot of context you're missing. These people, they don't understand our market. They don't appreciate what we're offering. We had to adjust our pricing model to reflect actual value. Our pricing model, Ethan's voice, remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Funny, I don't remember approving any pricing changes. Mara tried to edge toward the door, but the crowd blocked her escape. She was trapped in her own web of casual cruelty, nowhere to hide from the reckoning she'd helped create. The truth is, Ethan said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed shop. You stopped working for Grind and Grace a long time ago. You started working for yourselves, using my business as your personal piggy bank, while treating my customers like marks. In some con game, he walked behind the counter, reclaiming his space with each deliberate step. The register, the coffee machines, the carefully arranged displays, all of it, designed with love, perverted by greed. This place was built on a simple idea, Ethan continued, that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, that a cup of coffee should be a moment of connection, not a transaction to be exploited. My mother taught me that you earn trust one cup at a time, and that once you break it, he looked directly at Dylan, then at Mara. Once you break it, it never tastes the same again. Dylan made one last desperate play. Come on, Ethan. I kept this place profitable while you were off playing entrepreneur with a second location. These are the realities of modern business. You can't run a coffee shop like it's still 1995. You're right, Ethan said quietly. You can't. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered, his voice carrying the weight of conviction earned through betrayal. Which is why we're going back to what works. Fair prices, honest service, and treating every person who walks through that door like they matter, because they do. Applause began slowly, then built to a crescendo that shook the windows. Tommy Chen stood and started clapping, followed by the construction worker Dylan had scorned, the elderly woman with her paperback novel, the teenagers with their second-hand dreams. Ethan looked at Leela, who was wiping her eyes with a dish towel. Leela, would you like to be our new manager? Her sob of relief was answer enough. Dylan stormed out without another word, Mara trailing behind him like smoke following fire. The crowd parted to let them pass. their judgment silent but absolute. As the excitement died down and normal business resumed, Ethan found himself back where he'd started, behind the counter of his mother's dream, serving coffee to people who mattered simply because they were human. He looked out at his customers, at the community he'd almost lost, and smiled. "Trust," he said to no one in particular, "is like coffee. Once it's burnt, it never tastes the same. But when you get it right," he inhaled the aroma of fresh beans and new beginnings. "When you get it right, it's worth everything." The morning sun streamed through the windows of Grind and Grace Coffee Co., lighting up a space where integrity had been restored, one honest cup at a time. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in calling out quiet corruption and standing up for what's right, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories where leadership doesn't shout, it just shows up, and where the smallest acts of integrity can change everything. See you in the next story.